Church. I'm president of Artisan Coffee Imports. We were founded in 2009. In 2016 actually, we started moving containers of green coffee. So for the first 7 years, I was trading coffee that other people had brought into the United States, getting ready for the big move. And then 2016 is when we actually started moving containers from East Africa to the US, to both coasts. And that's what we've been doing every year since. And my big vision is to be a specialist of importing green coffee from East Africa. Never planning to do Central America or South America. I love those coffees, but my specialty as a importer is going to be East African coffees. I really found a need to do a better job, to have more opportunities to be trading coffee in sustainable ways that improve the lives of farmers. We offer artisan roasters, small and large, the consistency and the transparency that supports a roaster's brand when those things are part of the roaster's brand. And then we also do this consulting, supply chain consulting with producers at origin to help them improve their quality and their consistency and increase the share of the export price that the producer gets. But all of this just comes back to trying to be a bridge between producers who are producing wonderful coffee and roasters on this side of the supply chain who would love to have great quality coffee, and there needs to be more facilitation to help those two meet. So that's where I see myself, as the bridge between those two parties. There's a lot of roasters, when I was first getting started in 2007, 2009, who were talking about direct trade. We're going to cut out the middleman. And I think we've evolved as an industry to where a lot of roasters understand that them going to origin, especially East Africa, every year to develop a long-term relationship with a farmer in a place like Rwanda or Ethiopia is just not possible when you're running a retail coffee shop. Not to mention the budget is huge. $2,000 for one plane ticket. So I see myself being the team member for roasters like Sabbath who want a long-term relationship that's like direct trade, that's purpose-filled, that's meaningful, but somehow it's also got to be like a cooperative. Let me buy the coffee that some other roasters elsewhere in the US are buying, and then there can be one importer who's bringing back the stories, bringing back the photos, and managing that relationship with producers in a really ethical way that matches your values, right? In the early years, I was trading coffee that other people had already imported, and that was from around the world. My goal was to help producing countries, which are all lesser developed countries, mostly all around the equator, and I wanted to help them develop economically. And I thought coffee was a cool way to help that happen. So I said, but I really should learn from an expert first before I try to do a lot of this. And sure enough, there's this Michigan State University land grant university within an hour of where I live. And so I registered as a kind of old graduate student in a master's program where I specifically chose the professor that I wanted to study under as my advisor, because he had done a lot of work in coffee in East Africa. And his name is Dan Clay. And I was just super fortunate, Trevor, because after I got into his graduate program as one of his students, he got a major grant to do a 3-year coffee research project in Rwanda and Burundi. And I got to be one of the little graduate students with the smart faculty who went overseas, and I asked him and he agreed that I could live there for a year. So I lived in Rwanda for a year with my husband and 2 of my 3 kids, so that I could be like the monitoring and evaluation coordinator. And that allowed me to get such strong roots in Rwanda, because for that research, I visited at least 13 coffee washing stations, and I picked the one that I wanted to start importing from. I will say that while I was there, figuring out these things about green coffee and the cool things some cooperatives are doing, I was also observing Dan Clay, this professor from Michigan State University. He had a way of working with Rwandans that I was observing, and I feel very fortunate to have observed, right? Because it was very different than I might have come in otherwise. He had a more soft and diplomatic way of working with Rwandans that helped me, that continues to help me today, manage relationships when there are challenges. Because building relationships with suppliers is no different than building relationships with customers. You go through challenges, and you better understand how to work through those so that you can come out stronger and not have everything break up all the time. The every year challenge is getting the coffee to the capital city, which is where it has to be before it can export. So there are untold number of things that can go wrong between the place where not only the coffee is farmed, but then it gets prepared for export, often in a rural area that's 4 to 7 hours drive away from the capital. So there's this long chain of things that need to happen before the coffee is even ready to export. And so my annual cycle is, what can I do to better predict how long that's all going to take, and hopefully to smooth out some of the hiccups so that my suppliers are better able to meet the deadline. Like, one thing I learned early on, let me tell them, like in February, I want the coffee to be ready to export on July 29th, and actually set a date. And then everybody's working towards that date. And that helps because now we're more clear about all the things we're trying to do to facilitate that. So that's kind of an annual thing of like actually being ready to export. Long-term issues are price. The first one I will say, because farmers to this day say that they're not paid enough. And so we as an industry are still working through, where is it in the value chain, in this very long supply chain, that the money is getting kind of withdrawn so that there's not enough when we get to the price that the farmer gets. I see us working on that from two different angles. One is understanding what the cost of production is, and then we have to work on the other side, which is probably where you hear more of it, Trevor, is, what can we do to educate consumers about how much coffee really costs? Because the legacy of our industry is that coffee was basically grown by slaves in Brazil, right? That's how you get a $1 per cup of coffee. And lots of people think that's normal, right? But if you're actually going to pay farmers and have it taste good, and then all these other things, like we want them to, maybe also have health insurance and things like that, then you're going to start paying more. And I think that's the education piece we're working on with consumers. Any product that's exported out of the United States, there's the FDA, there's lots of regulations. You're going to have to do your bureaucracy to get something exported out of the US. Each African country also has a process that you have to follow to export. What's different is in Rwanda, there is a central export warehouse. And all of the coffee that's going to be exported will go to Rwanda's export warehouse before it gets loaded on trucks to get to a port and get on a boat. In Ethiopia, there isn't a central place where all the coffee ends up. It's more like just all of the dry mills are in Addis Ababa, the capital. And then the other fascinating thing about Ethiopia is they only export half of the coffee they grow. because Ethiopians are the oldest coffee drinkers on the planet. It depends on the farm and the farmer and the equipment that they have available and their market. I've noticed many female-owned farms in Ethiopia only offer natural coffee, not washed, because they can't afford the machinery to do depulping. You need a big, rather expensive depulping machinery and setup with, concrete this and tanks and water silos and all that to do washed coffee well. In Ethiopia, most of those are owned by men. I'm trying to build a women-grown, women-owned supply chain, and so I'm finding those tend to be farmers who only can readily offer natural. What many coffee farmers are able to achieve is something like 10 kilograms per tree of cherry. So that's 22 pounds, but now we have to take off the weight that's going to be the cherry to get down to green. So that would get us to 3-point-something pounds of green per tree. And Rwandans are actually at a very, very low yield because their trees are so old. So a huge effort in Rwanda is to renew coffee farms with younger trees that can be more productive. Rwanda's average productivity per tree is under 2 kilograms per tree. So that's under 4 pounds of cherry. And that we're at under a pound of green per tree. And the average coffee farmer in Rwanda has about 400 trees. So that's 251 pounds of green coffee. But in Rwanda, that's what it would be. Ethiopia, I think, is interesting in that they're so much more regionalized. It's a huge, huge country. And I think there are pockets in Ethiopia which probably have similar low productivity and very small farms. But then other places in Ethiopia, they do have larger farmers that are, they've been growing their coffee for generations after generations. They have higher yields. Asking, what is the average yield in a producing country is a great question to ask. And Colombia is really like a gold standard, but the gold standard is Brazil. Brazil gets absolutely the highest yields per tree. Early on, when I was there in Rwanda, I got to see how excited a room full of women coffee producers were when the folks who were buying the coffee came to visit them. They were dancing. They did their Rwandan beautiful traditional dances in their beautiful, colorful clothes because they were so happy about this importing company buying the coffee. And I was like, that's why I want to do this. I want to do something that I know is impactful for these people, that it's having an impact on their life. I want my work to be about creating this impact that I'm seeing right here. And the time of year where I get to see the videos and pictures and stories come back is when I get reminded and keep refueling that this is why we do this. I do try to be an astute business person. If this business is ever making zero money, then I need to stop. Then I need to say, okay, I really need to go be someone who works for a nonprofit or a charity or something like that. I do think it serves coffee farmers best if it is a supply chain that makes money for everyone along the route. But we are definitely not the same kind of profitable business that investors are going to be interested in, like global importing companies. That's why we're small and probably always will be.